Welcome to Three Thoughts On. This is Rafael, and today my guest is Nicc Johnson from Music Health. Nicc is a seasoned musicologist and serial entrepreneur who has dedicated the past 2 decades of his life to the study of music. His primary areas of focus are the definition of music taste and the exploration of the effect of sounds on the human body and brain. Nicc spent his formative years in Ibiza, Spain, where at the age of 16, he became a professional DJ and embarked on a global journey. These experiences ignited his passion for the science of music and shaped his life's mission, which is to empower individuals through the power of music. Nicc is the creator of the trademark AI music brain, and in 2020, he synthesized his experience to establish Music Health, which is a music technology firm aimed at crafting the foundational elements for all future music therapies and interventions. The cornerstone of this venture is the cutting-edge technology called precision music. Nicc and I discuss how music can help people who suffer from diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and dementia. But we also talked about how technologies like precision music can help overall mental health, stress, and anxiety. This is a very relevant topic today, and Nicc offers powerful solutions that I know you will find useful. And now, Nicc Johnson. Welcome to Three Thoughts On. Today, I am very happy to have Nicc Johnson with me. Nicc, how are you doing today?
Very good, sir. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, thank you for making the time. I know you're at a stage in your business where you're quite busy, so I'm grateful that you're making the time for me and my audience. Let's get started. I'm excited to have this conversation because, well, the reasons will be obvious here in a minute, but give us a few minutes, a little bit of your background and what led you to do this business that we're going to be discussing today.
Yeah, well, my background is perhaps not the most obvious, but so I'm originally from the Netherlands. That's where I was born, but I was raised in Spain on a little island known as Ibiza. And I got into music at a really early age. And because of my circumstances and where I grew up, I ended up becoming a professional DJ at a very young age. I was 16 when I started doing it full time as my paying job. And, that was obviously an amazing experience, but the main thing was it got me to travel around the world at a very early age and have wonderful experiences, but above all, meet a lot of different people from different cultures and backgrounds, which really fascinated me. But through my work and through my love of music in general, I became very curious to understand the science behind everything that I was observing as a DJ, like seeing the reactions that people had to music and music moments. And so that led me to musicology, and I've been studying that ever since. So it's two decades strong now of studying the science of music, and I was particularly interested in understanding music taste for a simple reason that it would make me a better DJ, but I was also just very fascinated by what defines our music taste and then how does sound impact our body and mind. And that led me on a journey that ultimately brought me where we are today, which is creating Music Health.
So let's get started with that you just ended with, Music Health. What does it mean when we talk about Music Health? Give us a little bit of background of how much does that encompass and what does it actually mean?
Yeah, so simply put, it's really just the intersection of music and health, which seems very obvious. But what we really mean there is I've been a big advocate for music as a therapy for as long as I can remember. I've been talking about this for many, many years. We know that music is a lot of fun, and it creates a lot of amazing experiences with friends, but there's more to it. And we've kind of lost our way in understanding the importance of the arts, particularly music. And through my work, that message became a bigger voice in my head and a bigger theme that I wanted to talk about with others. I've long been interested in brain health. It's just an area that fascinates me. I love neuroscience. I try and read as much as I can about all the learnings about the brain, which is still relatively new compared to other science. And I just always thought about, knowing what I know about music, what can we do using the latest in technology to improve our health using music, in particular brain health. When I talk about brain health, it's sort of a global term for us to talk about everything, which also includes mental health, but it also includes brain disease and neurological disorders. And so the antithesis of all of this was, how do we elevate the value of music to be applied in healthcare, particularly in improving or better managing brain health? And that's why I started Music Health.
So that's interesting. You're the first person I've spoken with. I am also a fan of neuroscience. I tell people that I am a student, and I think I will remain a student, because anytime you read something and you start feeling good about yourself, about how much you think you understand, you're humbled quite quickly by the work that the real knowledgeable people are doing every day that we get to benefit from. So I am a student of brain health, but you're the first person I've spoken with that has actually categorized brain health as the sum, if you will, of mental health and brain disease. And I guess those at the highest level, those two can interdependently be benefited by music therapy. Am I following you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we now know, thanks to neuroscience, and I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. There's so much new material every day that we're learning, and things change as well. That's the beauty of science, right? Things are revalidated over and over again, or there is a new hypothesis that is validated, which is exciting. And what we now find with music, because we're able to do brain scans, MRIs, and closely observe what's happening in the brain, we can see the impact that sound has. I always start with sound, and then the impact that music has. And listening to music or participating in music activities is just a really amazing workout for the brain. And depending on how it's used and applied, it can benefit particular areas of the brain, which have a bigger impact on particular conditions. So just at a very top level, and we could dig into that later if you want, but the needs of somebody experiencing anxiety and the application of music is very different to somebody who lives with Parkinson's or somebody who has dementia. And understanding what that is, you can then very clearly define what it is you need to do with the music to get better outcomes. And that's where we spend a lot of our time. And that's the area that I'm excited in, is understanding the nuanced differences between each of these and then being able to create tools to support those.
So there's a couple of things you touched on there. And as you can see, I'm taking notes as we go. This is educational for me, because you're now separating brain health into two main areas, mental health and brain disease. And now you're also making a distinction between the impact of sound versus the impact of music. At what point does sound become music, and how do those two actually help an individual that is using one or the other for a particular type of therapy?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, when does it become music? That's a challenging one to answer, because that really depends on the individual and what it is that we're going through and how our brain works. But simply put, our brain loves to identify patterns. And it's why when we hear certain sounds, which is not music, they turn into rhythms in our head and we start tapping along, and because it's recognizing a pattern and it's anticipating it. But what's really amazing about the brain, and this is, again, still relatively new in terms of more and more information validating this, but sound enters through our ears, obviously. It's converted into electric signals, which are then processed in the brain. But sound impacts the way we feel. And this has everything to do with the evolution of our brain. So the fight and flight responses. And that is closely linked to the limbic system as well, which controls many things. But in simplistic terms, sound impacts the way we feel. And we are surrounded by sound all day, every day. And a big thing that we talk about is understanding when sound is positive versus when it's negative. If you live on a very busy street, for example, if you live in Manhattan, there's a lot of noise at high decibels at all hours of the day, pretty much. That causes fatigue, that causes, other things. It's stress-inducing if it's a lot of negative sounds. So we talk about being able to replace negative sounds with positive sounds. So, for example, just nature noises. If you're in nature, you feel better because of a lot of different things. And then if we talk about, positive sounds, we believe that the most positive one is music, because aside from it being able to make you feel a certain way, it's also making your neurons fire. It's real brain activity. And we see this with scans that they've done and lots of research on this. And neuroscientists talk about it's one of the few or one of the only natural stimulants that we know of that activates all the different areas of the brain at the same time. And given that we have a supercomputer up there, that's very, very powerful. Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. And again, this is definitely educational for me. So it's interesting, you mentioned there about the positive versus negative effects of sound. And I'm going to start from here and then kind of build it up a little bit more into music therapy for specific things that you and I have discussed in the past. You mentioned the example of Manhattan or any kind of busy city, and then the positivity of, for example, nature sounds. But we've gone beyond that, right? Because we now know that there are man-made sounds that are actually could be quite positive. So obviously our brain has a way to process noise from cars versus noise or sounds, I should say, that come from some other man-made source, like a synthesizer of some sort. They're both artificial. They're both created by man. None of them come directly from nature, if you will. But somehow we are shying away from one versus the other one that can actually make us feel better. Is that part of what you guys study? Is that breakdown of at what point does a sound impact us as humans negatively versus positively, independent of where they come from?
Yeah, so there's another way to look at this, right? And it's an example that I often give, which is if I'm walking in the city and I'm surrounded by sounds and I hear a car horn, I might not really react to it because my brain is aware of the surroundings that I'm in and it's anticipating those sounds, and it hears that sound and goes, oh yeah, that's a car horn. I've heard that before in this context. But if you're walking in the middle of a field in a meadow and you only hear like the wind rustling and the birds, and then you hear a car horn, you are most likely going to jump up and get a fright because your brain is not prepared for that sound in that context. So that's an interesting one because it's the same sound, but depending on the context, it's going to trigger your fight or flight response. And that's an important thing to understand because I think it's less about whether it's man-made or nature, if you will. It's more about your particular experiences and how those sounds make you feel. So the emotional output. And a great example of that is somebody's voice, right? There's people that talk to you that their voice just annoys you. Hopefully that's not many people in your life, but it happens. But for somebody else, that voice is really charming and endearing, right? And we don't really know exactly why that is, but it's to do with the frequencies and what have you. It can also do with the person itself and how they make you feel. But that's an interesting observation, right? Like there's one sound for you, which is beautiful, might be horrible for me. And actually, that also directly relates to music taste. One song will make you feel really motivated and happy, and it might cause me a lot of stress. And that has everything to do with the emotional relationship with that sound.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because I was having a conversation with a friend over the weekend about music and music quality. And of course, there's never a good way to have a discussion about what music is good quality versus not good quality, because exactly of what you said. It's all a function of how that particular song makes us feel. And if I'm honest with myself, I go back to the 70s and 80s when I grew up, and there are particular songs that are very fond to me because of when I heard them and what was happening in my life during that time. But if I'm honest and I actually take the song as it is and try to break it down, it doesn't meet the prerequisites, my current prerequisites of what good quality music and writing is. Yet, every time I hear these songs, I feel good because it brings me back to a time, a particular situation, a particular moment. And that's that context that you're talking about, right? So we have these two areas when it comes, not just to sounds, but now to music specifically, where you hear a song and you can have a particular feeling because of what it reminds you of, because of where you were and what happened in your life at that time. But you also get at a feeling too to a brand new song that you never heard before. And those gotta be two different processes. Am I right?
Yeah, so I talk with a lot of neuroscientists. So a lot of what I share with you on the science side is a translation of what's being communicated to me, because I'm not a neuroscientist. But there's a thing around familiarity and serendipity here as well, right? So the brain is really good at recognizing things very quickly. And we see that with a song. You can hear 2 seconds of an intro of a song and you already know what it is. And you're like excited, ready to jump up and sing along, right? Familiarity is really important. And there's a reason why a lot of pop music sounds the same, because songwriters know that you'll get hooked quickly because your brain will recognize it and anticipate the right things, like the breakdown, the build up, the verse to chorus. Like, it's predictable for a reason. If we think about that example that you gave of certain songs making you feel a certain way, when I started out as a DJ, before DJing, I was always creating mixtapes. Then I became a DJ. I was very opinionated about what was good music and what was bad music, extremely. And I would have arguments with people that would listen to a certain type of music for many reasons. As I got older and as I learned more about this, I actually freed myself up to enjoy a lot more music than I did previously, but also understand why people listen to different music. And what became really interesting for me to observe, and as part of the work that we've done, is can I then, based on the music that somebody loves, try and make some general assumptions about the type of person they are? Not in a bad way, but more understanding, like, are you more of an extrovert or an introvert because you like certain type of music versus other things? And that made me remove all the barriers I had around judgment on music taste. So if somebody says, I love Taylor Swift, awesome, I get it. If I love Mozart, get it. Dizzy Gillespie, whatever it might be, I understand that for everyone there's a context for that. So that's just really interesting to think about for yourself. It's opened up the doors for me in my own experience with music. But familiarity is a big thing for us and the brain. And when it can connect something to something else that you've had a positive memory with or emotion, then the initial reaction is, oh, this is good. That might change towards the end of the song. There might be an intro that you're like, oh, wow, this is amazing. And then by the end of the song, you're like, maybe not so much. And that's interesting because understanding that allows you to then put different music together in different ways, which is essentially what a DJ does, right? To create this journey. And if you can do that with AI, you can create really tailored experiences by understanding what are those triggers in the music that will make you feel a certain way.
Fantastic. So now that we have all this context, how is it that we use music and the way that it interacts with people to help people with brain diseases, and mental health?
Yeah, so going back for a second, in the research, what they found is that music is naturally a very powerful stimulant for the brain. What that really means is brain activity. So when we do challenging things like solving a really complex math equation, bad example because I wouldn't be doing that, but something along those lines, you need more compute power, right? You need to concentrate. Your brain needs a lot of energy to be able to address that particular problem. When we listen to music, there's a lot of different things going on, and it requires different areas of the brain to communicate with each other to make sense of what we're hearing. And that's a really good thing because it's a brain workout. And what we now know, and there's more and more evidence of this, is we, just like our body, we need to continue to stimulate and exercise our brain to stay sharp, elastic, being able to absorb new information and process it. So that's where music becomes really beneficial. Then if we dive into specific care outcomes, if you will, so if we're addressing, for example, dementia, I'll give you some specific examples to be concrete here. So dementia is a brain disease which over time makes it harder and harder for you to do the most basic things because the different areas of your brain are not able to communicate with each other very well. What research has found is that the area of the brain responsible for your long-term memory is the last to be impacted by this disease. And as you mentioned yourself before, there are certain songs from your childhood that when you hear them, they just make you feel good. Well, it goes a little step further there. If we're able to find music from your childhood that's connected to your long-term memories, we can then activate that part of the brain, and that acts as a trigger to then stimulate the other parts of the brain in that moment to communicate with each other again momentarily. And so it's going from a car engine that is struggling to start up because the battery might be a bit flat to the battery getting a hit of energy, and then the whole engine starts up and it starts purring again. It starts working properly for a while. That's what happens with the brain when we find the right music for somebody with dementia. And the reason it's music from your childhood is because a lot of our music taste is formed in our early years. And this is an overly simplistic way of looking at it, but the reason for that is from the moment we're born until about our early 20s, our brain is expanding and learning. And then at some point in our 20s, it's optimizing. It's discarding things that it doesn't need to function better. So in our early years, we have a lot of first-time experiences. And when music is attached to those experiences, it's imprinted into our brain. And while it might be really hard for us to recall that out of ourselves, if that music plays, our brain instantly goes back to that. It recalls it and goes, oh yeah, you were 13 and it was your first high school dance with that girl you had a crush on. It's instant. Like I can say for me, Tony Braxton. As soon as I hear that song, I go, high school dance when I was 13. It's instantaneous. So that's the example for dementia, but every type of use case is different. Parkinson's, as an example, that is a movement disorder, right? That's a disconnect between the brain sending information to the body. And what research has found is as we get older, our natural ability to produce dopamine, which is our pleasure and reward hormone, neurotransmitter, that decreases naturally. And there are ways that we can elevate that, obviously. But for somebody with Parkinson's, dopamine is much, much lower. And part of the problem with that and the other neurotransmitters, and again, I'm translating what I've been taught by the neuroscientists here, the messaging between the body and the brain is in disconnect, in disarray, which is why you get the tremors and the movement. Part of that is because there's less neurotransmitters. What they found in the research with music is that if you find music that has a steady rhythm, and a tango is always used as an example, like has a really pronounced beat, you can actually get somebody to move to that rhythm. It allows the brain and the body to sync up again momentarily. So it's a great exercise to allow the two to come together again. What we also know about music is that if you play music that you love, your guilty pleasures, you get a hit of dopamine. And so for somebody that has low dopamine, producing more dopamine can be beneficial. So you can imagine that for somebody with Parkinson's, if they're able to listen to the music that they love, really those guilty pleasures, the ones that you want to sing along to no matter what, that also have a steady, pronounced beat, that type of music can be used as part of their daily exercise with movement and can help that process. So those are just two examples. There's many, many more. But the idea is if you understand what the outcome is that you want to achieve, you know how to apply the music and what type of music to apply.
Just to bring everybody into context here, because you used two examples, of course, dementia and Parkinson's, which are serious diseases. It's hard to find someone who hasn't been directly or indirectly impacted by these diseases, right? You either have somebody directly, or somebody who has a relative or a friend who's been impacted by these two. And for reasons outside of this conversation, it seems like it's getting worse. But when it comes to music therapy, it seems, and please keep me honest and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like based on this, it is actually therapy, not a treatment, in the sense that in these two examples, you're able to use music to get the person from some sort of state of disarray into a better state so that maybe they can function a little bit better temporarily so that their immediate ecosystem improves. If they're, for example, in an assisted living facility and they're struggling because the disease is doing its thing, music can help get that individual in a better state of being so that the folks that are working can do what they have to do for this person, right? You mentioned temporarily twice in these two examples because it's a temporary relief. You're reaching back to the past. You're reaching back to these connections that most likely are still there because, as you said, these diseases tend to not touch those long-term memory areas until way later. You're using these dopamine hits, using all of this that music brings because music has this ability to increase brain activity everywhere so that the person can maybe be more at ease instead of at the mercy of the disease. Am I saying this right?
Yeah. What's important to distinguish here, though, very briefly, is it's not a treatment. You're right. That's definitely not what this is. It's an intervention. And when we talk about music as therapy, there's really three main categories. So there is music therapy, which is a licensed music therapist doing a therapy session where they use music. And that's a one-on-one or sometimes in group activities. There's what we traditionally know as music interventions, which is people playing a musical instrument or participating in music in some way to feel better. And then there's music medicine, which is listening to music as a passive thing to make people feel different. Usually it's, from a negative state to a positive state. The work that we're doing with Music Health is combining the three. And the big takeaway there is that there are benefits to all three, but there are also serious limitations to all of them. The biggest one with music therapy is that it's a manual process limited by human capacity. And there are simply not enough music therapists around the world to be able to provide services to everyone that could benefit from it. And it's also, there's a price thing, it's prohibitive, etc. So there's a scaling issue. Music interventions, I come from a musical background. I played musical instruments. Playing an instrument is great for your brain, but it's also not for everyone. It is challenging, and it's like learning a new language. Some people pick it up like that. Others struggle a bit more with it. So while I definitely think it's something that everyone should do to some extent, learning how to play jazz guitar might not just be your thing. And that's also okay, because there is the third one, which is passive listening to music. If we combine the three, what we have essentially created with our precision music, and we'll get to that in a second, is an AI-driven technology that is self-managed, meaning you do not need a music therapist to provide the right music for you based on your needs. Music-based interventions. Now it's a mouthful, but the idea there being, how can we apply music at the right time to momentarily change the outcomes that we want? To your point, like with dementia, oftentimes it's making somebody feel safe. That's a big thing. If you're confused, you don't know where you are, you don't recognize the people that are caring for you, that can be very scary, right? So just the ability to feel safe and comfortable is a big thing. Parkinson's, you're very aware of what's going on. Your brain works great in every other capacity, but it's not communicating with your body, which leads to a lot of frustration. So if you have an exercise that you can do where you can feel that synchronicity again, that's a wonderful experience. But it's not a cure. It's not going to get rid of what you're dealing with, but it does give you some power back in that moment, which we think is important.
I'm glad that you made that breakdown, because for me, I am an amateur guitarist and I do some singing as well. And I personally feel the difference. Granted, I'm not suffering from any ailments, thankfully, but I can feel at a moment of stress the difference between listening to something that is soothing for me versus picking up the guitar and playing. For me, actually, and I don't know if there's any correlation, I love your feedback on this, but for me, depending on the level of stress that I am allowing myself to experience, I can soothe myself by either listening to something in my catalog of soothing music, if you will, versus picking up the guitar and playing, versus picking up the guitar, playing, and singing. And if I'm honest with myself, there's been a handful of moments where the stress level is so, I've allowed myself to get so stressed out that even singing and playing the guitar won't do it. So I got to go for a run or go for a walk or go do something else, right? So I can imagine, right, that there's that spectrum of listening versus actually doing, and then how much of it you're actually doing that can help an individual get into that, either that place of safety or that place of steady state.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I use music throughout the day myself, often with headphones on because of, again, the negative sounds around in my environment in the city. But there are times where, again, if I can anticipate correctly, and sometimes I get this right, sometimes I don't, then I know what music to play and it evens out pretty quickly. But there are times of high stress in the environment that I'm in where that same music will cause further agitation. And a big part of that is when we are stressed out, what we're trying to do is level out our cortisol levels, our fight and flight responses, bring them back to baseline, and for the brain to say, you're safe, it's okay. Because when we're stressed, that cortisol is being pushed, right? Like we're in high levels of alert. And so that requires processing power. You're what's coming, I got to be ready. So adding something like trying to play the guitar and singing is more compute power, again, in simplistic terms. So in that moment, that might just cause further stress. Whereas what you really need to is maybe just lie down, breathe, and listen to some ambient sounds that you enjoy, for example. But this is different for every person, right? Because I know people that it really helps them to relax to listen to heavy metal. Heavy metal is not relaxing to me in any capacity. Doesn't mean I don't like it, but I need to be in a special mental state to be able to enjoy it. But if, there's a nurse that I know that's what she listens to relax. So it's different for everyone, right? So you need to be self-aware enough to understand what that is for you to get the most out of it. And I think that's where we've failed as a society with music, to understand our individual needs with the music. So we go with, for simplicity, the radio format is, I'm told this is what I need to listen to feel relaxed. And then somehow you don't feel relaxed. It's because it's not tailored to you specifically. Like one size does not fit all with music taste. I'll add this point because it's an example that I give often, but our music taste is like our DNA. Like you and I, we share 99.9% the same DNA. Yet it's that zero point 0.1 that makes us completely different human beings, right? It's the same with our music taste. You and I might have a lot of overlap with music that we enjoy, but it's these outliers that you talked about before that define what our music taste is. And that has everything to do with how it makes us feel. And like you said, like face value, there's some songs from your past where if you analyze them, you're like, questionable, but they make you feel great. I have examples of artists and music that my parents listened to that if you look at it today and you listen to it today, you think, gosh, that's cheesy. But they instantly give me good memories. One of my favorite artists is Aretha Franklin because of my parents. And every time I hear Aretha Franklin, it sparks a good memory for me. And so I know that if I feel down for whatever reason, there's a particular Aretha Franklin song I can play. And as soon as we get to the chorus, change man. And I'm self-aware to know all the different types of music that I can do that with. And the mission with what we're doing with Music Health is making that really easy for others to be able to find that so they understand how and what to do.
Well, that's fantastic. And that's a great lead in because unfortunately we are running out of time. But I want to give you the opportunity to kind of wrap everything around that we've talked about, because we've talked about mental health, brain diseases, but also we've talked about ourselves, right? And how music helps us, folks that fortunately we're not suffering from these diseases. But you guys are looking at all of this, right? You're looking at music as a tool to keep us healthy, to help those who are suffering from disease to have a little bit better quality of life. So take the next, handful of minutes and kind of just put everything together from your perspective, from what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to offer the world in this particular domain.
Yeah, thank you. So with Music Health, our core technology is called precision music. And our goal and our aim with precision music is twofold. But what this technology enables us to do is identify and find the right music at the right time to alter, modify a mood or mental state. So what does that mean? You gave several examples. Person X is feeling Y, we need this outcome. And with precision music, we're able to identify what that is very, very quickly. And our goal is for precision music to become the foundational layer for all future digital music-based interventions for whatever care outcome you can think of. And we've designed it in a way that it can adapt by understanding those different conditions. So we have the examples of whether it's anxiety, dementia, or stress relief, etc. With that, we have built our own application, which is specific to dementia care. And it's a tool designed to help the caregiver improve their care routine and improve their care outcomes. And you gave the example before. There's a lot of challenges with dementia care, which we don't have time to get into all the reasons why. But the observation was it's challenging as a caregiver to provide the right support all the time because there's a lot of things going on. We identified that if you are able to understand what music can help that person with the dementia feel a different way, so in this case, reduce their stress, make them feel comfortable at ease, or give them a boost of energy, you can actually use that every time you have to interact with them with an activity of daily living. So help them shower, take medication, get dressed, what have you. And what we're seeing with this, with the technology, precision music, and then this application, this user experience, we're transforming the way people are providing care. And they're using this tool on the background as a passive tool to support their entire care routine. And so we know from our partners in the usage that, on average, they're using our tools 6 hours a day, which is basically an entire shift of care. And they're just continuously using micro interventions supported by music. But our goal with Music Health is much broader than that. And it's very much providing the technology to be able to create all types of music-based interventions to support all areas of brain health. That's the blue sky vision. And what we find very interesting is there's a very low barrier to entry to music adoption because the majority of the population loves music already. And we're now in a phase of transition where people are proactively looking for self-managed solutions that they can incorporate into their daily life. And we see that as the transition phase for people to want to adopt music as a therapy, music-based interventions to support their daily well-being. And it could be for people like you and I, it's like, moments of stress or to support my exercise. But for others with anxiety or depression, it could also be very meaningful. And for caregivers that are caring for somebody with dementia or somebody with advanced autism, all these areas, there's a place for music-based interventions. And I'm really excited about bringing that to the world and giving people the tools to better manage their own mental well-being.
Well, that is fantastic. I'm a big fan of what you're doing as a music lover and as a technology lover as well, to see those two merge and put us in a position where we can all benefit from that. I can't wait. So where can people find more information about what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so they can go to our website. It's musichealth.ai. Or if they're interested particularly in what we're doing in dementia care, we have an app called Vera, Vera, and our website is veramusic.com. Vera is live in English-speaking countries at the moment, and we will be expanding that. And on Music Health, they can find more information about the other areas of focus for us in the immediate future.
This is great. Well, Nicc, we could keep talking for a long time, but we're out of time, and I know you got other meetings, so thank you very much for making the time. I'm grateful. And
thank you.
Hopefully in the near future, we'll be able to meet face-to-face here in Lake Nona.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.